This day in sports history. It's March 16th, and on this day in 2018, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County became the first 16 seed to ever beat a 1 in the men's NCAA tournament. The tournament field expanded to 64 teams in '85, and while a 16 nearly beat a 1 in that first iteration of the expanded bracket, when Michigan survived a scare by Fairleigh Dickinson, here 33 years later, it had still yet to happen. UMBC was taking on the top team in the country, the Virginia Cavaliers. And leading up to this one, there was not any indication really that this would be the day. The Retrievers did not exactly have a long history of NCAA appearances. This was only the second time that they'd qualified for the big dance. Their previous trip in 2008 had been as a 15 seed, and they lost in their first-round matchup with Georgetown by 19. During the 2018 season, they'd only played 2 power conference teams, Arizona and Maryland, and they lost both of those by 20-plus points. They'd finished second in the America East Conference. Now, it was supposed to be a rebuilding year for Virginia, but Coach Tony Bennett had done a masterful job coaching the Cavaliers to a 17-1 conference record, winning the ACC regular season with a 4-game cushion. They were the top-ranked team in the country and had won 23 of their last 24, which included winning the ACC tournament. Virginia went on a little bit of a spurt in the first half to take a 6-point lead, but UMBC came back and it was tied at 21 after the first 20 minutes. Out of the break, though, the Retrievers came out firing. Here's Jim Nantz, Bill Raftery, and Grant Hill calling the action for CBS that day.
Mora behind the back. Sherburne sets up the long shot, and it's a 6-point lead. Over to Sherburne. Takes it back outside. 3-point shot again. They hit another long-range shot. Lyles.
UMBC hit 12 of their 24 three-point attempts to open up a double-digit lead. Virginia, on the other hand, was a chilly 4 for 22 behind the arc. And as the clock wound down to triple zeros, it was a decisive 20-point win for the Retrievers.
Superlatives, you can't come up with enough. Absolute. Incredible performance. Shock and awe in college basketball. UMBC makes history in Charlotte.
Now, there was a special connection for Retrievers head coach Ryan Odom. Ryan is the son of Dave Odom, who was a longtime assistant under Terry Holland at Virginia, and he had distinct memories of when his dad coached in Charlottesville. It was certainly not the ending to the season that Virginia had envisioned, but they were able to put together a very similar regular season run the following year that resulted in another number 1 seed and a run to the NCAA tournament title in 2019. Hey, real quick, you've heard me talk a lot about the Sterling Soap Company over the past few months, and if you haven't tried out their soaps, I get it. It's not easy changing up your routine. But let me just say, if you give them a try, I'm nearly 100% certain you will have 0 regrets. They carry not only bar soap, but shave soap, liquid body soap, body lotions, beard balm, lip balm, and a lot more. Plus, there are myriad scents to choose from. Their products are made with natural ingredients and scented oils, and they are committed to being environmentally conscious. And I always get a handwritten note on my packing slip, so I know it's been checked before shipping, and it's a nice little human touch in a world that seems to be going away from that. Give Sterling Soap a try today at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1958, basketball player Maurice Stokes collapsed on the plane ride home after a game, and he never played again. The Cincinnati Royals had just lost 100-83 to the Detroit Pistons. It was the first in their postseason best-of-3 playoff series with Detroit. Cincinnati's Maurice Stokes scored 12 points and grabbed 15 rebounds in that one. The 6'7", 240-pound Stokes was only in his 3rd year as a professional, but he'd established himself as a force in the paint and on the boards. He averaged 17 rebounds a game in his career, and guys who played with him or against him said if given the chance to play out his career, the name Maurice Stokes would have been a top 50 all-time guy. a name that could easily be dropped with the likes of Bill Russell or Elvin Hayes. Boston Celtic great Bob Cousy called Stokes the first great athletic power forward. Karl Malone with more finesse, he said. Stokes had been one of the NBA's best in his 3 seasons. In his pro debut, he scored 32, pulled 20 rebounds, and handed out 8 assists. He went on to win Rookie of the Year in 1955. He was an All-Star every year he was in the NBA. He led the league in rebounds in his second year and was among the league leaders in assists. If only he'd been given the chance to play out his career, is one of those great what-ifs in sports. But instead, tragedy struck. The team boarded a plane for their short return flight to Cincy in preparation for Game 2 the following night. Shortly after takeoff, Stokes collapsed and he had a seizure. He was rushed to a hospital after landing. The seizure was determined to be caused by post-traumatic encephalopathy from an incident 3 nights prior on March 12th. In that final regular season game against the Minneapolis Lakers, Stokes fell to the floor and he was knocked unconscious after hitting his head. The seizure on the plane ride home on the 16th left him paralyzed and with permanent brain damage. Stokes' teammate Jack Twyman stepped in as his caretaker, helping raise money for his medical expenses and his daily care, and eventually became his legal guardian. Stokes learned how to type again and he was able to communicate a little bit. He became an inspiration to many by keeping his good humor and attitude despite his unfortunate circumstance. He was posthumously inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2004, with Twyman delivering his induction speech, choosing not to talk about his basketball talent, but instead Stokes the man and how he approached life each and every day for the remainder of his life.
It was amazing, and never, ever in the 12 years did I ever see him depressed or angry or why me or how did this happen. He looked forward to the new day every day, and he was an amazing person, and it was an unbelievable opportunity for me to be exposed to this man and to see what he was made of. And as Wayne said in his piece, he inspired everybody that came in contact with him.
Maurice Stokes died in 1970 at the age of 36. On this day in 1974, the Oakland A's signed Herb Washington to their roster. What, you never heard of him? Well, there's probably a reason for that. Herb Washington was not a baseball player. I mean, he may have played some Little League and maybe back in high school, but he was a track and field star, and more exact, he was a world-class sprinter. He was and may still be the world record holder in the 50 and 60-yard dashes, and I say may because, well, one, these are weird distances that aren't really contested any longer, and his race was hand-timed. He ran the 50-yard dash in 5 seconds when the recognized record is 5.22, set in 1982. Anyway, the takeaway from that is that Washington was fast. And so A's owner Charlie Finley signed him to be a pinch runner and steal bases. In 1974, Washington appeared in 92 games, stealing 29 bases and scoring 29 times. His 29 base swipes was good for 7th best in the American League, but he was caught stealing 16 times. A base-stealing blunder in the '74 World Series may have been the beginning of the end for him. After being sent in as a pinch runner for Joe Rudy in Game 2 and representing the tying run on first, he wandered a bit too far from the bag and he was picked off. The A's lost that game, but won the series for their 3rd consecutive World Series title. He did come back in 1975 and appeared in another 13 games with 2 stolen bases, but he was released soon after, replaced by another speedy player, but one who could actually play in the field and take some swings at the plate. So here is Washington's distinction. He is the only major league non-pitcher to play in at least 100 games and never have an at-bat. One other interesting fact about Washington, His 1974 contract had a clause in it that he had to grow facial hair, which he actually struggled to do. He used an eyebrow pencil to add in more and to satisfy this weird contractual obligation. Now, why was that in the contract, you may ask? Well, the only reason I could find for that clause is that Reggie Jackson showed up to spring training with a handlebar mustache. Finley, thinking Jackson was doing it as an attention grabber, paid players extra or mandated it in their contracts to grow facial hair so Jackson wouldn't stand out in an era when facial hair on ball players was mostly discouraged. In fact, the A's became known as the Mustache Gang because of Finley's strange efforts. Hey, I needed to call a quick timeout to let you know that we're giving away a $50 gift card to Home Field Apparel. Have a favorite college sports team? Of course you do. You're listening to a sports podcast. Well, Home Field Apparel has all the great gear so you can support your team in style. Jerseys, hoodies, hats, and a whole lot more are available in your team's colors and insignias. So, go to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways for your chance at a $50 gift card to Home Field Apparel. I've also put a link in the show notes. Now, let's get back out there. We've got more of this episode to do. On this day in 1975, Jack Nicklaus won the Doral Eastern Open without a pitching wedge in his bag for nearly half his round. Nicklaus was warming up on the range prior to teeing off, and he was working on his short game with his wedge when the head of the club separated from the shaft and went flying down the range. The broken piece was retrieved, and a friend of his went to work on it with what at the time was called fast-drying glue to repair the club. The epoxy had to dry for a few hours, and it was finally returned to Nicklaus's bag at the 7th. He'd used a variety of clubs on the few times he needed the wedge on the front nine. He capped the day not with a wedge, but with a 3-iron from a divot on the 18th fairway to about 20 feet, and he rolled in the birdie for a 3-shot win. He had a new wedge in his bag by the time he showed up in Augusta for his classic duel with Johnny Miller later that year. On this day in 2001, Annika Sörenstam became the first women's golfer to shoot a 59 during an event. It was the second round of the standard register ping at Moon Valley Country Club in Phoenix. She birdied the first 8 holes on the day, and at that point, the nerves began to fray.
And you can imagine, talk about being nervous. I mean, talk about sweaty palms and just, really feeling it. And I remember turning to my caddy, and I don't know why I did it, but I did at the time, and I said, I am so nervous, I just have to make par now.
She parred 9, and strangely, that calmed her down. So she got back on the birdie train at 10 and birdied 4 in a row to get to 12 under for the day. She finished the day on the 6,500-yard par 72 course with 13 birdies and 5 pars, and she actually had a legit chance at a 58, but rolled her 10-foot birdie putt on 18 just past, and she tapped in for par. Sörenstam's 59 was 2 shots better than the previous LPGA low round of 61, shot by Kari Webb and Sayri Pak. Sörenstam is still the only woman to ever go sub-60 in an LPGA round. And on this day in 1964, Detroit defensive lineman Alex Karras and Green Bay Packer running back Paul Hornung were reinstated by the NFL after serving an 11-month suspension for gambling on football. These two were 2 of the league's best. Hornung was the 1961 MVP, and Karras was an All-Pro. Commissioner Pete Rozelle suspended the pair in April 1963 for betting on football games. Hornung says his bets were with friends and never exceeded $200, but Rozelle said he found evidence of $500 wagers on NFL games between 1959 and 61. Karras was found to have made at least 6 bets between $50 and $100 on NFL games. 5 other Lions were also fined $2,000 by the league for betting on the 1962 title game between New York and Green Bay, but were not suspended. Hornung would go on to be elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in '86 Karras would also become more well-known in the 80s as the TV dad on the sitcom Webster. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Back in 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright flipped a coin to decide who would be the first pilot. Wilbur won, but his first flight attempt failed, allowing Orville to soar into history 3 days later with the first successful flight. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.